Call meeting to order. Public information notices, there are none. Declaration of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Any member of council regarding today's agenda or from a meeting in which a member was not in attendance? Seeing none. All right, we have one deputation. John Barr, please. I'll remind you, John, we will hold you to your time.
To the environment. The last 4 or 5 years of my career up to 2006, after the Washington tragedy, I worked a great deal of time in Toronto on risk assessment. This was with the Drinking Water Management Division on risk assessment, analysis, best practices, implementation of the O'Connor recommendations came as a result of the O'Connor inquiry into Washington. A little over 2 months ago, Chief Administrative Officer spoke to the Planning Advisory Committee. That's the city committee on which I sit. She spoke quite eloquently and passionately, I'll add, about how enabling housing is one of the top priorities in the city's strategic plan, and about how this council wanted badly to do the right thing on housing. Since then, that committee, that's the Planning Advisory Committee, has approved recommendations for council's consideration that essentially are meant to make housing starts in this city administratively easier. And here we are dealing with an issue that, as you've heard over the past few months, may have the effect of making housing starts and the maintenance of current rental stocks financially more unstable. I had provided some detailed information to the CAO a couple months ago on the sewer and water rate issue as it applies to multi-family house buildings. I understand she shared it with councillors and staff. I hope that the information was understandable and the calculations around it accurate. I did not share this with others, but given where we are today, I felt it appropriate to appear here, briefly to go over some of the items again and share some additional relevant information. Hopefully this will help you decide on an appropriate reasonable course of action on Friday. At that time, council was considering the installation of individual water meters on each unit of any multifamily building in order to assess a monthly water and sewer bill on each unit as though it were a single-family residential unit. This became an issue because it had been brought to the attention of the previous council that there were inconsistencies in how some condo dwellers were paying higher bills for water and sewer services because they were being charged on a different basis than those in other condos and multifamily buildings. Each of their units was metered, and they were paying a monthly service fee and consumption charge equivalent to that of a single-family dwelling. The original builder of that facility had, at the time of construction, decided to install individual meters on each supply to each condo unit. To confuse the issue further, I was told that there may have been a specific bylaw at that time around water rates in the former municipality of Keewatin to account for this type of building. Amalgamation of the 3 municipalities in the year 2000 seems to have resulted in a number of inconsistencies between the various bylaws which govern each community. Even so, with few other exceptions, if any, most multi-family buildings today are metered by single meters based on the size of the meter line servicing the building. The larger the building, the more people being housed in the building, the more water required for use, the larger the water line to serve the building, the larger the meter, the higher the monthly service fee. So when one looks at various rate structures applied at systems across the province and the country, that is generally the process by which multifamily buildings are charged a service fee for their water and sewer use. That is the current situation in Kenora. Consumption charges which are consistent across all living units in the city are then applied and added to the service fee for a total monthly charge. Today, Council is considering a 7-year phased-in plan which will abandon individual meters and charge buildings of 4 or more units on the basis of a single-family residential monthly service fee, which is today is $88.96. That will be on per unit, and then a consumption fee, which I expect will be based on a single metered amount of water entering the building. I'm not quite sure how one can enforce that type of bylaw, but I'll get into that shortly. It's also worth noting that we're in the final 2 years of a long-range plan to maintain operating costs and establish infrastructure reserves with another 5.5 increase in rates in each of 2020 and 2021. At the end, this plan will see residents paying about 100% more for water and sewer services in 2021 than what they paid in 2013, which I believe was the start of the plan. I also earlier implied in my written material to the CEO that Kenora has the highest rates in the province. I was wrong. Though Kenora likely has the highest monthly service rates in the province, the dubious honor for the highest water and sewer charges goes to Prince Edward County, which operates some half dozen various systems of different sources and treatment technologies. There, a family may pay more in total costs, but pay less in service fees, about 19% lower than Kenora. Almost 50% of the charge in Prince Edward County is for consumption, which encourages users to conserve. In Kenora, only 29% of the equivalent rate is for consumption. This does not encourage conservation to the same extent. I'd also reported that Cobourg has a special rate for apartment buildings of 3 or more units, which is essentially equivalent to that of a single-family residence. However, Cobourg's monthly service fee for such units is only $26.59, some 70% less than the Kenora fee. I was also asked by one councillor about the city of Oakville, where rates are administered by the regional municipality of Halton. There it appears that multi-family buildings of 4 or less stories, reason why it's 4 or less stories, but I won't get into it, there they're metered on a basis of a per unit and charge a service fee of $30.69. Again, far less than the equivalent Kenora charge. My point in raising these 2 examples is to demonstrate that in the only 2 Ontario municipalities for which I was able to find an equivalent rate structure for multi-family dwellings or buildings, the service fee is substantially lower than the Kenora fee. I read and analyzed staff's report of June 19th to council, and I won't dispute its figures. However, it may have been useful to identify the current total revenues generated by the city's multi-family buildings as compared to the revenues anticipated in years 1 to 7 of the report and adoption. Excuse me. There should also be information supplied on exactly how the recommended 7-year phase-in cycle would work, assuming a per unit service fee will supersede the fee based on meter size. Depending on the number of units within a building, my sense is that there may be a revenue shortfall in year 1. Currently, under today's rate structure, a 6-unit multifamily building on a 1-inch line pays a service fee of about $1,495 per year, which would rise to $1,577 in 2020 and $1,664 in 2021 at a 5.5 increase per year. If, as recommended, each unit paid $88.96 per month, phased in over 7 years, that equates to 14.3% per year for about $916 in year 1. Double that, $1,832 in year 2. Finally reaching a pinnacle of $6,405 in year 7, not including any annual increases in intervening years. For that particular configuration, that is a shortfall of about $580 in year 1. The report does imply in its risk analysis that the average user pays 8% more than they would pay under the new suggested billing system, but there are no figures to substantiate that value. Also, that in itself is not a risk. It would be more helpful if the risk was defined as the likelihood of closures of current rental stock and lack of new multifamily housing construction against the effect and impact of both on the city. Simply put, such closures and lack of construction will worsen an already poor housing background in this community. I also have difficulty in determining how one would enforce the type of rate structure being contemplated for multifamily buildings. These buildings can include apartments, condominiums, townhouses, mother-in-law suites, micro-apartments, studio apartments, and mobile home parks. It can be a mix of residential units and commercial enterprises. It can be social housing buildings which are geared to income. The landlord decides to close one of 4 units. I've got much more time, Mr. Mayor, I'm good.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay. If a landlord decides to close one of 4 units to be lower than the 4-unit threshold, or if a unit in a 10-unit building is empty for a month, does he or she still need to pay the service fee for that abandoned or empty unit? Is it fair to charge the 72 570 square foot seniors units that house 1 or 2 people in the Parkview apartments with rents geared to income, and no in-unit dishwashers or laundry facilities, no car washing and lawns to water, the same monthly service fee that a family of 4 living in a private 2,000 square foot residence pays? Are you contemplating charging a service fee to local housing units, or to social housing units like the Parkview, which I believe are partially subsidized by the taxpayer? That's like taking money from one pocket and putting it in another. It would actually define social housing from affordable housing from market attainable housing. Will a tenant or landlord in one pay more than a tenant or landlord in another? And if so, why? It seems to me that you are legally unable to charge differing rates to residents based on their ability to pay. However, you can provide rate offsets to seniors and seniors on low incomes like other municipalities do. Lastly, if there's no definition of what the current landlord water and sewer costs are today based on the number of rental units in the city, how will one establish who owes what over a 7-year phase-in period? Like others, I am passionate about the city, and my wife and I would like to remain here throughout our retirement. However, as years go by and we get older and less able to maintain our current home, we see fewer housing possibilities to allow us to remain and live in the manner we desire and can afford. So my purpose in being here is to try and ensure that you do not create real or imagined impediments to housing starts and to the maintenance of current rental stock. Your staff have reported that there has not been a construction start for multifamily type living arrangements since 2014. I understand there are current proposals for market attainable multifamily buildings in the works. I would not like to see these jeopardized by a new rate structure which makes them financially unstable. Nor do I wish to see you make any decision that may risk the number of current units that are currently available in the city. As indicated earlier, city surveys taken as part of the strategic plan process indicated that housing is a top priority with voters. If it is such a good idea to charge multifamily building dwelling units a monthly service fee equivalent to that charged to an individual single-family home, one would think everyone would be doing it. Of more than 600 water systems in the province, only those serving Cobourg and the regional municipality of Halton seem to be alone in that type of rate structure, and they charge a substantially smaller service fee than that proposed. Sometimes the best idea is to do nothing. After this year, we have 2 more years of planned increases under the current rate structure, and no decision on rates for multifamily buildings needs to be made until at least that time has expired and the whole rate structure is hopefully reassessed. As those of us who ever had to rely on a well for water supply know, the pump works don't fix it. I encourage you to please keep that in mind on Friday. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Thanks, John. Does any member of council have any questions? All right, thank you very much. So, we have before us the report. There's 5 options, 3, and again, despite what some people may think, every one of these has been vetted through our legal department, so we've got legal representation and recommendations on all of them. So option number 4, the grandfather clause, and option number 5, based on our city solicitor, they're not recommended. So basically, we have 3 options to make a decision on. And the first option, and what people seem to forget is, this has already been ratified. And it's the full, at this point, it would be approximately $90 a month, so it's 88 something. That's already been approved by council. It's approved by the prior council, which a number of us sat on. And so if we don't make any changes and don't do anything today, that will be and stay in effect, and that will be what goes forward. The only change on that is, I believe now that the recommendation is to phase it in over 7 years as opposed to the original 5. Is that correct, John?
Correct.
Okay.
And also the eliminating the requirement for individual metering.
Yeah, that was the next one. So the option there is that that will be the only, that's the second change. First is 5 to 7 years. Second change is it'll no longer be mandatory that you have to install water meters in current or new. It'll be up, if we have new builds, it'll be up to,
Individual metering. I just want to clarify, yeah. You still would have to have
yeah,
one
the
meter.
meter going in. It's the only way we can track the water. And then the other option, and it's based on something that was proposed last, it's to charge 50% of the current rate, and that would be phased in over a period of 3 years. So one of the questions came forward at last meeting was whether or not multi-res, we could split out the life leases and the condo units and leave the other multi-res units to themselves. That's been determined that we can't create a class within a class, and it's not recommended. So we have before us then, and I'll open up for discussion based on those options where we want to go. I would request that people in the audience please hold their comments. So who would like to start? All right, Councillor Smith?
So I am going to support the original resolution passed by last council, but consider the option of the 7-year phase-in. We had people make residents make deputations to us. They asked for more time. We gave them more time. We asked for, they asked for additional considerations because of the burden, and we did that. So we listened and we acted upon that. The one thing that did cause me some concern and gave me a reason to pause was that it might impede future bills. And I took that into consideration, and after we got legal advice, I understand that there are opportunities through capital planning and a grant process to incentivize multi-unit builds. That's the correct way to go. It's not to have the ratepayers of the present system subsidizing people that are not paying the same for the same service, and I am convinced, based on the information by staff, there are no efficiencies in multi-unit builds to the system. So, in my opinion, it should not be up to the existing ratepayers or new ratepayers that come into the system through multi-unit builds to be subsidizing that system. We can do it through grants, and I think that's the way to go if the concern is we will jeopardize new builds. When I received all my information, I always look at who the experts are. The experts are our staff, our operations manager, who is qualified to do that job and to give those opinions, and that's the expert opinion I'm looking for. We had legal advice. That's another expert opinion that we've used or I've used in making my decision. They're the experts. I respect their information and their analysis, and I'm convinced that is the way to go. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything, but I really believe that the ratepayers of the system should not be subsidizing other people in the system. If there needs to be subsidies because of low-income users or low-income users of the system, that subsidy should be coming from the taxpayers, not from the users of the utility. That's the way to go if it will have that impact. So for myself, I think this is the right decision. And it's good policy that benefits all ratepayers, and it doesn't favor one ratepayer over another. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Excuse me, if you can't hold your comments, I don't want to hear bullshit, I don't want to hear people. You can leave the building. All right? Respect the process or else leave. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Goss.
To me, the issue of fairness is a tough one. It's something we have to address, and I reference that both Councillor Smith and myself, neither of us are part of the Kenora sewer and water system, but there are a lot of other people that are, I believe, not quite paying their fair share. My recommendation is that we accept option 2, which removes the requirement for an individual water metering. And I'm going to go with I prefer to see option 3. I understand that for new builds, we can accommodate with a branding process, but there are a lot of people who are living in smaller apartments that aren't using quite the same amount of water as everyone else. They are, however, part of the system. It's a $240 million user pay system. Everybody has to be part of it. If you're using city water, you should be part of it. It has to be run as a break-even venture. This is no cash grab. There's no money being grabbed and stuck into city money. There's no city residential taxpayers' dollars going directly into this. It's been a struggle to find a fair and equitable solution, but I'm convinced that option 3 is the way to go. It's unfortunate that the monthly jump in option 3 is larger than it would be in the option 1 on a 7-year break or phase in. I'd be happy to see a 4 or a 5-year on option 3, but option 3 is where I'm sticking with, which is the 50% or $44 and roughly and pennies per month increase phased in.
Thank you, Councillor Goss. Councillor Van Wellingham.
While I wasn't here when this original decision was made last May, over a year ago, option number 1, I do agree with it. Whereas 4 or more living units be charged a per living unit service fee based on the number of living units within the building, times the sewer and water service fee for individual homes. And the reason I agree with this is there's 2 different classes of rates right now with domestic and commercial. And we don't want to be creating 4 or 5 different ones. It would be a nightmare for staff to bill. When I go into the Shell gas station, there's only one price. Everybody pays the same. I go to the beer store, everybody pays the same. Go to Walmart, everybody pays the same. So I feel we're getting the same service here with sewer and water, every citizen in Kenora, and we should all be paying the same, not a different rate. So I support option number 1.
Thank you. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. I was part of the original council, or the council that passed the original resolution. There have been challenges and deputations that have come forward from the community based on housing issues and housing impacts. I was not here for the last council meeting, but I was here for the committee of the whole where it was discussed in detail. And based on information provided us to date with the updated report, information received from legal counsel, the principle of user pay that I talked about at the committee of the whole, and following that principle, we found that the principle of user pay is fairly broad, and some of it can be with the interpretation of the council of the day as to how we interpret and vote on it accordingly. I'm going to remain with the original recommendation at this stage, taking me into Friday. See what the discussion is today and on Friday, but I'll remain consistent in my direction that I mentioned at committee of the whole, and clearly understanding that this is going to have an impact in our community, but also understanding that I'm basing my decision on what I see as fairness and equity across for all citizens. And I think Councillor Smith covered a number of these areas. Our staff have done their job. They've provided the information to us as a council, and I firmly believe that we should make a decision on this. And understanding that any decision made by council can be challenged, but at this point I'm going to remain with the recommendation, and that includes not the need to install individual meters in the units. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMillan. So, recognizing that we all have our own thoughts, mine are based on what I believe is best for the municipality. And one thing we saw, and one thing that's really jumped out in the last 2 weeks since a full-page ad was put into the paper, was a number of people coming forth to council saying that they want 100% equality across the board. I had not one new person come forward and say supported what was the stance of the other group. Now, recognizing that has no bearing on my decision. My decision is based on what I think is fair, and fair and equitable aren't the same thing. I do not believe that the multi-res users, owners, nonprofits should be paying 100% of the residential. I honestly believe, based on the numbers I've looked at, and talking to developers and talking to the nonprofits, that if we decide on Friday to go with this, you will not achieve any housing units in Kenora. We'll have single-family builds, but we will not see multi-res. And so that's why I proposed the rate I did last meeting, recognizing that there's people in this room, even at 50%, they're not going to be happy. And the people who want 100% on the other end are not going to be happy. So I firmly believe that the best decision for this council and for all the users of the system is to take option number 3, 50% phased in over 3 years. Everybody seems to be in agreement with option number 2, to eliminate the requirement for single meters in each unit. But I really hope that between now and Friday, we have some second thought and really consider the impact of this decision. Because I know in my mind, and based on the numbers and based on discussion, that this is not the right decision. And so I'm going to be supporting the option of 50% over the 3-year period. So that's where we are right now. So unless there's anything else, we all have some thinking to do, because the decision rests with the 5 people in this room. Councillor Ralco has a conflict. Councillor Poirier does not return to Kenora until the weekend. So that's where we are. Does anybody have any other comments before we move on? All right, thank you. All right, next issue, AMO delegation request. Adam, are you gonna take us through your report, or do you?
Yeah, no, I could just provide a little bit of an overview on our proposed delegation request.
One second, if people want to leave, you can leave now.
Yeah, so just a brief overview of the proposed delegation request to the 2019 AMO conference. There are a number of new issues that we'll be bringing forward. This includes a request to be made to expand the eligibility criteria for the extension of water and sewer for MHSC in relation to seeing affordable housing as a positive element of economic development. also have another request to meet with the Ministry of Agriculture through the Rural Affairs regarding our investing in Canada infrastructure program application for Railway Street. Simply just to reaffirm the value of the project from either an economic development lens, but also as from an asset management one. And those sum up the majority of the issues that we'll be submitting as part of our delegation request for AMO.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? No? I have two. There are other requests, but they have to be dealt with in camera, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the last one, the funding for investing in Canada infrastructure. Why does it go through the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs?
So they're administering the program on behalf of the provincial government. That's our contact point has been over that ministry. My understanding is that they are the ones that ultimately provide the recommendation to the feds for project approval.
So what's the purpose of the Minister of Infrastructure then?
The Minister of Infrastructure, well, for the public transit criteria, or the public transit stream, that's the program that's administered by MOI.
Okay.
So it's a rural and northern stream, which is managed by a different ministry.
All right, thank you. We're good then? All right. No motion? All right, so then at 12:33, we are adjourned.